Okay. Lesson 3 deals with municipal elections. So the elections at the city level and how those are structured. Maybe. There we go. All right, so there are the two most common types of municipal elections are called at-large election systems and single-member district systems. But there are two other types of systems that are utilized in Texas. One called cumulative voting, which is much more complex, and preferential voting, which is also complex. And so we're going to look at each one of these a little bit more in depth as we move forward. So at-large election systems are defined as a system where all voters in the city elect the mayor and the city council members. So relatively simple. And so these members are elected by everybody in the city, but there are a couple of different variations of this kind of at-large election system. So you can elect individuals at large by place, which is the most common type of form used in Texas. And in this type of system, candidates will file for at-large ballot positions. So you file for a position and you are elected at large, and you're given a number designation, place 1, place 2, etc. And voters cast one vote for each at-large ballot position. And the candidate with the majority is elected to that place on the city council. So it's relatively straightforward. Everybody in the city votes for all the members. You file for a place. I'm filing to run in place 1. I'm filing to run in place 2, place 3. And whoever gets the most in 1, 2, or 3 is elected to that particular place. Then there's at-large by place with residence wards required. And this system is a system where candidates who file for a position must live within a geographic area. So I couldn't run for a position in my city for the north side of town because I don't live in the north side of town. I live on the south side. And so candidates must file for a position in the geographic area in which they live. Then voters will vote at large. Not only will the people within your geographic area vote on you, but the whole city gets to vote. But you must live within a specific area or ward of the city, the place that you're running for. And so Abilene, Texas is going to be a place that actually utilizes this type of voting requirement. Everything is at large, but you must live within the 2 wards that divide the city. The city is divided into 2 wards with 3 council seats in each. And so you have anybody who lives north of South First Street can file to run within that ward, and then anybody who lives south of South First Street can file to run in the southern part of the city. And so those railroad tracks that run through town are really sort of the dividing factors of north and south. And so 3 members of the council are going to be elected from each ward. But even though you live in a specific ward, everybody in the city is going to vote on your election. And then the mayor can live anywhere in the city and run for election. So he doesn't have to live in a specific place. And then there's at-large no place, which is the least common form utilized in Texas. All candidates seeking to run for election on the council have their names placed on the ballot. And if everyone is going to vote for as many places as are open. So if there are 5 seats open and 10 people running, the top 5 candidates with the most votes are going to win. And with this method, it is not uncommon for a candidate to win with only a plurality or less than a majority. So the top vote getter will be elected to the open spots. And then we move on to what is known as a single-member district. And a single-member district can be defined as a system where the city is divided into election districts, and only the voters living in that district elect the council member from that district. And so it might sound a little bit more complex than it actually is, but it's not. So you have a city. It can be divided up into um, six particular. So if there's 7 members on your city council and one of them is the mayor, it can be divided up into 6 equal districts, and whatever district you live in, that's the only person you vote for in the election. You don't vote for all members of the city council. You only vote for your member of the city council. Only the mayor will be selected at large in this regard. Only the mayor will be selected by a vote of the entire city. Prior to 1975, no Texas city actually used a single member district. And when the 1965 Voting Rights Act took effect, the language surrounding racial discrimination in polls was targeted at specific districts in specific states with known problems. And so Section 4 example targeted those election sites with disenfranchising tactics, such as literacy tests, and required federal intervention. Section 5, which is the centerpiece of the legislation, subjected those targeted states and counties to pre-authorization requirements for any election-related legislation and to federal monitors during election time. And so going into the 1970s, with southern states attempting to circumvent the laws with at-large voting so that they could limit the concentration and effect of black votes, Congress began to make changes. And one of the outcomes was the growth of single-member districts across the United States. And so at the federal level, it was believed that in single-member districts, a minority group could be the majority, thereby electing desired candidates. And since the Voting Rights Act was amended in 1975 and applied to Texas, many cities have changed from an at-large system to single-member districts. Most of the major cities in Texas have been forced to change to single-member districts for at least some of the city council seats, though Section 4 of the Voting Rights Act has since been struck down in a Supreme Court decision in 2013, single-member districts actually do remain. And so we have seen, since 1975, single-member districts become more and more prevalent because of civil rights voting legislation. And so change from at-large to single-member districts actually substantially increase the minority candidates because, certain areas of a city might have a larger percentage of Latino or African American individuals living in it. And so if you concentrate them into one precinct or into one district, they can vote to elect minority candidates on a larger scale. Now, there are cumulative and preferential voting systems. And cumulative voting system is a system where voters can concentrate all of their votes on one candidate rather than casting one vote for each office up for election. And so, for example, if 5 seats are open, each voter has 5 votes, right? And you as a voter may cast all 5 votes for one candidate, essentially concentrating or accumulating your particular votes. So you have 5 votes, but you don't have to vote for 5 people. You can vote for one person 5 times. It's very rare, but Amarillo ISD does utilize this as their election method, and they are actually the largest entity in the state of Texas to utilize this particular system. And then there's the preferential voting system, a system that allows voters to rank order their candidates for the city council, also known as the instant runoff system. And all voters in this type of system will rank their candidates for city council, and all candidates' names are listed on the ballot, and the voter indicates the order of his or her preference, first, second, third, so on. Using a complicated ballot counting system, the most preferred candidates are elected. Although no city in Texas uses this form today, places like Gorman and Sweetwater have used it in the past. So, for example, if 5 seats are open, voters rank their candidates from 1 to 5 in order of their preference. And so there's a complicated ballot counting measure that will vote, and those individuals who were preferred more and higher and more often will be the ones that are elected to that position. And so I said, no city in Texas actually utilizes this system. It has been utilized by places like Sweetwater in the past. One of the interesting aspects of municipal elections is this idea of a nonpartisan election. And a nonpartisan election is defined as an election in which party identification is not formally declared. So we don't actually run for city council as a Republican or as a Democrat. We just are on the ballot. Texas allows home rule cities to conduct partisan election, but no city in Texas actually does so. And so this was a feature of the reform movement in the early 20th century, very similar to the progressive movement that I was talking about earlier. But what this does is it adheres to the idea that there is no Democratic or Republican way to collect garbage or pave streets or provide police and fire protection. And so partisanship should not be a factor in city elections. And let's face it, folks, at the local level, this is what the government provides. It provides for garbage collection. It provides for paved streets, paved roads, infrastructure. It provides for protection by the police, by the fire department. And so there's really no partisan way of doing this. You can't collect the garbage in a Democratic or a Republican way. You just simply collect the garbage. And so there shouldn't be any partisanship involved in city elections. Now, that's not always going to be the case. Instead of having partisan parties involved for decades in several Texas cities, nonpartisan organizations successfully ran slates of candidates and dominated city politics. Most noted among these organizations were the Citizen Charter Association in Dallas, the Good Government League in San Antonio, the Business and Professional Association in Wichita Falls and Abilene. And so while they weren't political parties, they were organizations, the influence of these groups really held sway in who got elected. And so partisanship was there. It just manifested itself a little bit differently. They have really declined in power, but it is not uncommon today. So it's still something that you can see in modern day. Now, voter turnout is low. And guys, I don't know if you know it or not, local elections are the most important because they most directly affect you. These are the people that are going to be passing ordinances that you have to follow directly. These are going to be the people that set tax rates that you have to pay. These are going to be people that collect your garbage. These are going to be people that have political sway over your life. We always typically pay more attention to the presidential election or the senatorial elections at the federal level. They are so far removed from your everyday life. Yes, what they do can affect you and does affect you, but it takes longer for that stuff to affect you. When you elect local politicians, it takes a lot less time for what they're doing in office to affect you than it does at those higher levels. And so you have to pay attention to what's going on in your local areas. Now, there are several reasons why voter turnout is low, very low. First of all, cities conduct local elections in off years, right? And so they are held when no state or federal legislative or executive elections are being held. And so some are held with state elections and U.S. House Representative elections, but they are typically not held with these very sexy elections that the media really focuses on, like presidential elections. So as a result, they don't get a whole lot of media attention. Also, cities may hold their elections in May rather than in November, when most people expect elections to be held. If you go out on the street and you ask somebody when elections are held, they'll probably say November. But in Texas, a lot of cities utilize May rather than November. And so it really stifles election because a lot of the time people just simply don't know that you need to go out and vote in May. And so there's actually been some studies conducted, and voter turnout rates in the city of Austin municipal elections were held in May, which are held in May, usually hover around 15%. 15% of registered voters go out and vote in these local elections. In the May 2016 municipal elections, early votes were at 11%. And day of voters going to vote at the polls on the day of the election were below 7%. But if you compare that to voter turnout rates in the city of Dallas, which holds its local elections in November, they had about 60% voter turnout in 2012 and 34% in 2014. So while they're still low, they're much higher than they are if you hold your elections in May. A lot of times, voter turnout is low because races are uncontested and they don't feel like there's any reason to go to the polls. There's also lack of media coverage, even at the local level. Even if you have a local newspaper, sometimes they don't cover local elections as much as they cover national and state elections. This is disturbing. As I said, this level of government affects you most directly, and so you should always, anytime that there is an election held, you should go out and you should vote. Doesn't matter if you're voting on dog catcher or trash collector or whatever. Go vote, because these things can affect you most directly. And so I'm going to leave you with the words of former Speaker of the House, Tip O'Neill, who said, all politics are local. And so leaving you with that, you need to go out and make sure that you affect local turnout. All right, so I'm going to leave you there. I'll see you in the next lecture.